This is Total Retail Tech Insights.
The content retail executives need to optimize their use of technology throughout their organizations.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. I'm Joe Keenan, the editor-in-chief of Total Retail, and I'm pleased to be joined on today's episode by Mitesh Lakhani, who is the Senior Director of Solutions Consulting at Adverity. Mitesh and I are going to have a nice conversation about the work Adverity does in the retail arena. He's going to tell us a little bit about his background, and we're also going to kind of talk a little bit about the current retail landscape and some of the trends that he is seeing emerging. So thanks for joining me on today's show, Mitesh.
Oh, thanks for having me, Joe. Really appreciate it. Yeah, can't wait to get stuck in.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. So I always like to start with my guests by learning a little bit more about them. I think it provides some nice context for the audience. So I'm going to start by asking you to tell me a little bit about your professional background, and then I want to know a little bit more about Adverity as well.
Sure. So my career began very much in the media agency space prior to Adverity. So my first job was in the ad operations space at iProspect. I still remember my first interview there, and the lady I was interviewing with, and I really wanted to work in SEO, and she convinced me that ad operations was the place that I should start my career. It was the discipline that was going to provide me with a broader view of the industry. And I was convinced, and I did that role for 2.5 years before jumping over to another media agency called MEC, who are now known as Wavemaker. I headed up the ad operations team there, dabbled in social for a little bit, and then made the switch to a pure data role. And that first pure data role was as the capacity of a data director for the BMW and Fidelity International accounts at Wavemaker, which was really an interesting role, which comprised of spotting data opportunities, working with a multitude of organizations and partners with the aforementioned brands, and ensuring that their media spend and strategy was optimized. And my role today as a senior director of solutions consulting is primarily focused on working with my team to ensure that brands and agencies alike can navigate their complex use cases, with the Adverity platform playing a key role in their data ecosystem. I guess essentially we want to solve our clients' problems and be their go-to partner when it comes to navigating their data challenges. So yeah, that's a little about me.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and you've kind of told us a little bit about Adverity. In terms of that data background, from your perspective, I'd love to get your take on how you believe the retail industry's approach to marketing data management has really evolved over the past few years. It's been kind of an interesting arena to kind of keep your eye on. Tell us a little bit about what you think is you're seeing in terms of the evolution.
Absolutely. I think making more efficient use of existing data sets is definitely the trend, or the pattern that we'll see and have been seeing over the sort of last 6 months especially, but definitely for the next 12. I think everyone was prepared for the cookie apocalypse towards the end of 2024 and ready to let go of the traditional data stereotypes that existed. However, I imagine that now we'll be thinking about getting ready to make use of what we've got already, and how we can manipulate, add to, augment to that. I think the old adage of you don't know what you've got until it's gone kind of rings true here, except we didn't quite lose it. The third-party cookie hasn't disappeared, and it won't disappear. So the magnitude of the previously proposed changes definitely had a heavy impact on data management strategy. So I think the time to collect as much data as possible in the traditional way now, as well as trying to eke out more of that existing data set, is what I suspect we'll definitely be seeing over the next 6 to 12 months for sure.
And as you see, thinking about the consumer too, all the different channels in which they're engaging with retailers and brands, it's not a linear purchase journey. So they're leaving these kind of digital footprints and data collection opportunities in so many different channels and bringing that together. Um, Having a data management plan to kind of create that singular view of the customer, that's obviously something that is a challenge for a lot of retailers. Tell us a little bit about some of the other challenges, and you could talk to that specifically, Mitesh, but some of the data management challenges that retailers are facing today.
Massively e-commerce focused, I think, is the place to begin this part of the conversation. I think the key challenge here has been the post-COVID era of consumerism, taking the forefront of how people want to market and how people want to actually purchase. So wanting things immediately and in the now is ever present across retail trends. And the Amazon model has never been more prevalent in our society as it is today, and it puts pressure on retailers outside of that sphere to pivot and provide as many quote unquote now services as possible. I think if you add to that to get a consistency among online bricks and as well as bricks and mortar retailers, so the guys in the storefront, in combination with the digital marketing teams, it's sort of a fraught and sometimes tricky relationship to manage. And the bricks and mortar employees want to retain their value. The digital teams want to show their value and their worth. And so navigating that complex relationship is historically always been the case. And it's important sort of today as well, very much so. If I think about the automotive industry specifically, in my experience working with some clients there, there was very much a challenge of, if someone wants to book a test drive for a car, they want to go ahead and do that as quickly as possible, and online is the quickest way to do that. Equally, you might be going to from dealership to go and book in a test drive as well physically. And so the challenge there is, who do you attribute that win to sometimes? And that's the kind of challenge I'm talking about between being at the storefront versus the digital space. And I think that's a challenge that really needs to be stitched together in some way. And that's the biggest thing I see over the next 6 to 12 months as well.
Because to what you're talking about there, it's that attribution, right? So you want to know what's ultimately driving the behavior, so that you can then optimize spending in those particular channels. Is that something that you're thinking about and seeing in the retail space?
What 100%, I think of an example of something like an econometric study, let's say, which gives us an indicator of whether cinema has an impact, whether online is having an impact, whether radio is having an impact. All of those channels, some are online, some are offline, and it's really about placing value to them. And I think that is really about jumping into the data and really trying to eke out where those indicators and signals are, because without them, you kind of running in that blind. Jonathan Wanamaker phrase of I'm wasting 50% of my marketing budget, but I'm just not sure which 50% it is, and we want to avoid that. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind.
So I want to get back to something that we alluded to a little bit previously, in terms of the consumer and their behavior and how it's really cross-channel, which then brings into play the critical importance of data integration and being able to kind of stitch together all these different touch points into that singular view. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of consumer behavior and how you can kind of combine them to see and really pull out and extract true value from the data that you have, right? It's great to have data, but if you can't extract any value and insight out of it to really take action, it's not going to do you any good. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there.
So this is my favorite kind of area of this conversation, actually. I really like thinking about how consumers are thinking themselves and their psyche, and looking at the trends at the moment and what's been prevalent over the last 12 months or so has shown that any company that sells ethical products are 5.6 times more likely to have growth as a company, even if a company has a range of ethical products in as a smaller section of its wider range. They're still going to be looked at more favorably versus their non-ethical product providing competitors. And that's something that's really interesting, and I wonder where that will go. Influencer marketing continues to provide advocacy for the masses as well, and that pro Instagram life, I suppose, is something that it continues to grow. A really good example, I keep sticking to the automotive industry here, but the example here is that 10 million UK adults in the UK have subscribed to a PCP car finance deal, which is essentially the leasing of a car. And it really reduces the barrier to entry to go and get a luxury car or a slightly better car than you could necessarily afford today. And that model of subscription is something that is just on the rise more and more. Everywhere you look, if you think about TV streaming services, that's where it all began. You've got shopping services in terms of a subscription-based, car financing, mobile phones, everything is kind of working in that direction. And that the health space is looking into this as well. You think about sleep trackers, smartwatches, all of that sort of subscription level and sort of subscription-based playing field is really, really important. So I think that's got something to say in our kind of digital retail space in the next year or so. And I think Podcasts also play such a key role in that. You know, we're talking about retail trends today, but if I look at the top 200 podcast lists, number 7 in the list is a podcast that specializes in sleeping and how best to get great sleep. Number 18 on that list is the On Purpose podcast, which is a great health and wellness podcast, one I listen to quite regularly as well. And the guests on shows like that are true advocates of certain types of products or services in that space. And that can truly have a large influence on a customer base and consumer habits as well. You know, they're just to name a few examples, but those types of trends and things that we can see, if you take a step back and look at what's happening there and then apply that to the retail space, the correlations are fascinating to look at because they are completely linked.
Yeah, and the consumer is their psyche is that they expect that the retailers and brands that they frequent, whether in store, whether digitally, whether on social, wherever the case may be, through a podcast ad, as your last example, they expect that the brands understand them, right? So that they're willing to share that data in exchange for better customer experience, better personalized shopping experiences, which leads into my next question, Mitesh, around data integration and management. It's kind of become table stakes, right, for retailers. I don't know that you can live without it. What are your thoughts there in terms of why it's so critical, and is it possible to be an effective retailer without a data integration and a management strategy today?
Well, I love that question, and I will answer it in just 1 second because I think just before we move on, I think that last point you meant was great. It's all about trust when someone is listening to a podcast or a place that they feel is comfortable. And if the information is coming from a trusted place, they're more likely to have, you know, a positive affinity with a product or service that exists there. So I think, yeah, trust is the
Yeah.
underlying sort of metric, I suppose, there. But coming on to your question about data integration, I think you can live and die by the data mantra in retail. It can paint any picture you want it to and tell the story to suit a narrative or an agenda that you might have to your internal stakeholders. However, the truth lies in the pure data itself and that inward view and reflection of really scrutinizing what you've discovered from a campaign from 6 months of that data. That's what gives you a true view on the way forward, not at the detriment of your overarching strategy, of course. But what I mean here is having that zoomed out view to paint that honest picture with the data. You know, you can have that experiment that you have in data and apply it for a week, and you're not going to get very many learnings out of it, but you can still make decisions based on that, right? So it's about zooming out and letting those data experiments take a bit of time. I'm sure we'll speak about that more in more depth later on. But you know, you don't want to be flying blind as a retailer, almost in the world of those third-party cookies actually being deprecated. And spending money just to kind of see how it goes and figure out what happens post-campaign. Like that's not a safe space to be spending your advertising money in. But it's really, focusing back on that data and having a zoomed out view, I think, as to how we can really gain some key insights.
Yeah, and I think this is a nice segue into what I wanted to address next, Mitesh, in terms of, you talk about being able to track and see how the marketing budget is performing, right? So with that in mind, tell us a little bit about some of the key metrics that you think are retailers that are listening should be really, evaluating and monitoring as they judge marketing performance.
Indeed. So the three big hitters, and there are quite a few metrics that you can look at of interest, depending on the nuance of the retailer that you are and the product and service that that you're selling. But customer lifetime value, conversion rate, and retention rate are the three most important things I feel that need to be looked at in terms of retail. Acquiring new customers, we all know that costs a darn sight more than retaining your existing ones. And so, that customer lifetime value one really, really hits home for me. But again, dialing back to the previous question that links to this so nicely, it's that zoomed out view that really gives you the ability to judge those metrics more accurately, allowing that time for your data experiments to take place really gives you that true insight of those metrics, and it really will show us the path to tread going forwards if we have allow for that zoomed out view.
we've talked about how this space is evolving, the data management, in terms of how retailers are collecting and utilizing data. There's obviously consumer, privacy is something that is critical importance. So this is something that's not a static space, right? You need to be thinking about how you can protect and future-proof your chosen solution and your data management approach. Tell our audience a little bit, Mitesh, your thoughts on how they could best go about doing that.
It's a great question because you can only plan so far ahead in our industry. Let's look at the third-party cookie non-deprecation to see how things can actually change so quickly in our industry. Everyone was planning for that to be the case and to have to market in a slightly blind way towards Q4 this year. But the most important thing to recognize is, have a technology partner that allows you to be able to navigate challenges like that. So you can always go down the route of going for the cheapest option as a sticky plaster to paper over the cracks of getting through the next 6 to 12 months. And that might be the right answer for some people, but I would suggest that looking at technology that can really grow your business and help you scale your business as well is really important. So selecting a technology partner that you can have a relationship with for the next 3 years, I think is the real key here. You can go with tech solutions that really cater to your needs right now and for your data maturity today, but also one that is planning and road mapping for the future of how not only their product is going to grow, but how their product can really be utilized in the right way for the brands and the retailers products to grow. And that's the key thing, picking the right tech partners that have and showcase a really great roadmap. And not to plug Adverity here a little bit, but that's what I like our think of ourselves here. We really want to have lots of different types of, but we have lots of different types of clients, but it's about making sure that we can help scale businesses. And I feel like tech partners in that space are really important.
So you've brought us to the kind of the technology part of the conversation, and I want to go over. I guess it seems almost impossible at today's day and age to have a conversation about technology without talking about the critical importance of artificial intelligence. Uh, I'd love to get your take, Mitesh, on how that technology specifically factors into this conversation about data management and integration that we've been having.
The buzzword of 2024, right?
Right. Yep.
AI. I think it's an already important part of our ecosystem, and it will only continue to have more and more influence, not only in our industry, but the world. I do think, however, the place in which I see it growing most is via places and organizations that we trust already. Trust is, I mentioned it earlier, it's the key element here. For example, if we are for our regular supermarket shop on a weekly basis, if they introduce an element of AI, we're more likely to give it a go and maybe begin our relationship of trust with it because we've always bought from our supermarket. That hasn't changed. We trust them. We go there every week. And so if they introduce AI, I might dabble. Institutions we know and trust have been around for a long time that are held to a rigorous amount of regulation, and we have that understanding of their history, are where I feel that we can kind of adopt AI a little bit more and accept it a little bit more. I was listening to a podcast the other day, Diary of a CEO podcast, I think it was, with Stephen Bartlett, and Yuval Noah Harari was on there saying as much, saying it's really about institutions that we trust. And if it's coming from an independent space or where AI is kind of on its own in and of itself, whether it's a new app or a new business that is solely AI focused, some people are going to find it really hard to adopt that. That's where the skepticism comes in. So it's really around how much you trust an organization as to whether you jump in, into that AI swimming pool and have a swim.
Yeah, and to your point, you have to have that foundation, right? You talk about having that trusting relationship and then utilizing AI as a tool to augment that relationship, right? It can't be without the trust, there's that skepticism that comes into play. And so I think you've kind of outlined that very well. I want to talk, Mitesh, about a couple of clients that you've worked for with rather at Adverity, and you've done some great work in terms of data integration projects. I believe you have a couple of retail clients that you want to spotlight. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So two really great case studies I wanted to just touch upon today. The first one is with Carter's who sell baby clothing and they have significantly improved their ad spend, their budget allocation. For example, if managers saw that a channel had customers in certain cities that are responding better to certain campaigns than in other regions, they were able to ramp up their spending really quickly and efficiently based upon the learnings that they were gaining out of Adverity. And a direct quote from someone inside Carter's reads, reporting is now on autopilot and the team can now focus on insights rather than spending time building reports. And that's such a big thing. I saw it very much in my days in the agency world. There were data teams that were spending so much time building reports and working with the most basic of things because there was a lack of automation in place. And having that enabled over time, I saw that change grow and evolve. And having that, our data team at Wavemaker, when I joined the company, was around 20 people. By the time I left 5 years later, it was 80 people in that team doing all the, varying degrees of certain things. And that's essentially because they were able to focus less time on building reports and more time on really finding where those insights were. And I think Carter's is a really great example of that. Another one, a brand that you will all know in IKEA, they've mentioned that aggregating their data to spreadsheets became automated for them and accessible outside of their own marketing department. In 2 short weeks, they were able to set up all of their data integration processes and implemented 20 new connectors to their database. So they received a really detailed level of granularity that they weren't seeing previously. They were able to identify trends via that methodology and patterns from their ad performance, as well as customer behavior. And a quote from them which I love, is many of our decisions and facts we uncovered from our data was processed by Adverity. And they also kind of mentioned that they weren't able to do 10% of what they were doing with their data before Adverity was part of their solution. And it's brilliant when you hear things like that from the clients that we work with, because we're really making a difference into how they're operating as a business. And that's something that's, I pride myself in being involved in such an organization. So yeah, 2 really cool examples of people that we've worked with.
And those are great examples. And I guess at the end of the day, you're also helping them obviously kind of crystallize the data that they have and be able to take action on it, which then can help optimize marketing spend, right? And reduce cost and, improve customer experience. There's many business benefits that your organizations that you're working with can achieve by some of the things that we've talked about.
Yeah, massively so. And that's the key thing. We don't just want to think about the use case and checking the box of the use case of the smaller part of the data challenge. We want to, be inquisitive about what that's actually going to ladder up to and mean for the organization. Is that going to shift more tables, for example? Answering questions like that. Like that's the crux of what we want to try and help with. And we have great teams internally that I'm not going to lie about. I've definitely poached some of my friends from the agency world because they're so smart and so brilliant at their jobs. And we've got those great people working within our organization because they really understand these challenges and what those clients are really trying to achieve. So having conversations with them outside of the technology is something that we're really great at as well. And that's why so many of our clients can say nice things about us, which is also really nice.
Yeah, that's always a positive, right? At the end of the day, you want them saying nice things about you. Um, you have quite a career here in the ad space, Mitesh. Based upon that, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the key lessons that you've learned. Thinking about you've cited 2 great examples of your work with Carter's and then IKEA as well. But there's also challenging projects I'm sure you've encountered during your career, but they can yield some really valuable lessons. What are some of those things that you've learned from some of the more difficult or more challenging projects you've encountered?
So I would say that the challenging aspects of the roles or the challenges that we actually see, it's when you're in a position of adversity. And a client of ours, I'm not allowed to mention their name, but adoption was a really key role, key struggle for them. We'd switched them over from one of our key competitors, and a lot of their internal stakeholders weren't necessarily super keen on changing their methodologies and how they were working with their data. And it took us a little bit of time to get in and understand those challenges. But what was so brilliant about it was that we didn't just provide the technology as a solution. We went in with the best practice element that I just spoke of. We went in face to face. We spoke to them. We spoke to their relevant teams. Took in their challenges, and we have a brilliant consulting unit within our organization who specialize in best practice, and they were able to detail out a key strategy on adoption for said client, and able to turn things around. And not only did they slowly start to adopt the product more, they renewed with us and have expanded their relationship with us. And those are the really key, amazing stories that I love to hear, where you're staring in the face of complete adversity, and you can turn that into a win-win situation. And that's something that we've been able to do on a number of occasions, but for one particularly large organization that, again, sadly I can't mention their name, but it's just super rewarding when we're able to be involved in opportunities like that.
I'd love for you to kind of put on your forecaster's hat a little bit, Mitesh, and talk about how you foresee the role of data in the retail industry evolving over the next 12 months to up to maybe 2 years.
So I think the big challenge this year was always going to be, how are we going to market our products without third-party cookies? What is our data and advertising strategy going to be in that retail space? And there were some technologies that were mooted to plug those gaps, but again, no certainties were provided whatsoever. And those technologies now also don't exist because they were built with the predication that this third-party cookie deprecation was going to come to pass. I think Google very much showed that advertisers have a real voice, and they heard the voices of the advertisers. They could feel and sense that the ad spend was going to be dialed back because everyone was very, very cautious in this space. And because of that, some changes were made on their side, and the third-party cookies are going to stay. And so that really brings the conversation back to the doors of the advertisers. I feel like the next 12 to 24 months is going to be focused on companies garnering all the data they can with those traditional methodologies, so they can have good indicators of attribution and insight with their spends. But the ROI will be somewhat measurable, as it has been, and making sure the right technologies are in place is going to be really important to achieve that. So that known quantity of marketing that we all know and have known for many years will be key here. And that double downing and spending in that space will show the true force and the power the advertisers have. So, those are the things that not only give a bit more control back to the advertisers, but it will be that really dictates what happens next in this industry.
So as you laid out a little bit of what you think is to come in the next year to 2 years in terms of the digital and data space, I'd like to get your thoughts on, we have an audience of retail marketers, right? So from your perspective, what are some of the tips that you might share with them as they think about their data journey and trying to, go forward in this environment in which you've kind of forecasted?
So you might have heard a theme of this already, but I'm going to double down on it because I think it's so important. I really would implore anyone who's listening to allow a sufficient time for any data experiments that they take and any strategies that they utilize in that space. A zoomed out view of a month versus a week's worth of data is, broadly speaking, the best way to approach things and figure out whether they've worked or not. Too often hasty changes are made on campaigns on what are perceived to be failed strategies. However, what is the downside to that is, for example, if we run a campaign and within a week we see a particular channel or platform isn't necessarily working the way it should be, spend is diverted away from that particular channel or avenue and put into the paths that look to be working. But what happens next time round is you still spread your budget across those 4 or 5 same channels or avenues or platforms, and you kind of repeat that hasty approach. Whereas a better view would be let the campaign run. If a certain platform or channel is failing, let it fail so that you can actually really garner true insight from it rather than a week's worth of data versus a month's worth of data. And so you will know then for the next campaign, rather than spreading yourself thin across 5 channels or 5 platforms, you can actually go to 4 because one definitely doesn't work rather than hedging your bets. And I think failing is fine so long as you fail correctly. And time is the essential and key ingredient to achieve that. So that would be my big tip.
So I've really enjoyed the opportunity to have this conversation with you, Mitesh. And you can, our listeners can tell not only your passion but also your expertise in this arena. I would love for you to tell our audience a little bit more about how they can learn more about Adverity. Is there any kind of call to action you'd like to leave our audience with?
Definitely. I'd love to invite listeners to come to our website, adverity.com, and book in calls with our excellent sales team. If you feel your data set isn't as informative as it could be, we not only have the technology, but the expertise in-house that I've alluded to previously in this conversation to advise on best practices, as well as scaling your business. We have a broad array of clients among our customer base who are at varying levels of data maturity. And the main reason for this is because they know that we can help them guide them on their individual data journeys. So yeah, please come and go up to our website, book in some calls, and we'd love to speak to you.
Yeah, and I'd echo that, and definitely I'd love for the audience to go to check out Adverity's website, and you can really get to learn more about the business. Mitesh has provided a great overview of some of the great work they've done, and potentially can work with them going forward. So I want to take the opportunity to thank Mitesh Lakhani, who is the Senior Director of Solutions Consulting at Adverity, for joining us on today's episode of Total Retail Tech Insights. Thank you, Mitesh. This has been it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for having me, Joe. Really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks for listening. For more information on this podcast, please check out our podcast channel page at mytotalretail.com/podcasts for show notes. Total Retail Tech Insights is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify. Make sure to subscribe on our podcast channel page as well. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a few moments to rate and review this podcast. Thanks, and until next time, this has been Total Retail Tech Insights.